I was 16 and looking for a new gaming PC to buy on Craigslist. I had just gotten my first job and wanted to treat myself after my first paycheck. I was online pretty much every day after work, scrolling through any new listings until one of them looked good. It was a 3-year-old Alienware with some decent specs, listed for only $200. In the description, it said they had recently upgraded to a newer PC and had no use for this one, but that it still works just fine. I sent him an email and he got back to me quickly. We exchanged a few back and forth messages before agreeing to meet up the next day. He told me to meet him at a specific grocery store parking lot at 8 p.m. It was kind of far, so I suggested somewhere else that we could meet halfway, but he made a bunch of excuses as to why he couldn't. He said he was going to be busy all week and wouldn't be able to drive very far, so if I wanted it, I'd have to pick it up near him. Although finding it a little annoying, I still thought the deal was worth it and agreed to pick it up. In the morning, I thought about it some more and almost decided to call it off, but then he sent me a few videos to show that the PC was working and also said that if there were any issues, he would refund me. So it made me feel better about it. I went through with it, driving 35 minutes to the grocery store that he said to meet at. Right as I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a truck in the far back. It was the only car in the whole parking lot, and the grocery store's lights were off, like it was already closed. I had thought the whole point of meeting at a grocery store was because it was a safe public place, so this was kind of defeating the purpose. Having 40 minutes though, I still pulled in and hoped it would go smoothly. I parked by his truck and got out. The man sitting inside leaned over and looked down from his window. He didn't smile or greet me or anything. He just looked down like he was inspecting me, which was a really uncomfortable feeling. Then he got out. He was an older guy, like late 40s or 50s. He had brown hair that was thinning in the front, and just from a quick look at him, you could tell there was something wrong. I stood a few feet away, trying to keep my distance, as he walked around and opened the back door. Inside, I could see the computer sitting on the seat, but not the one closest to us. It was on the other seat, further inside the truck. He then pointed into the truck and said I could take it out and look at it. His hand was still on the door, and he just watched me, waiting for me to crawl in and grab it. I stood there awkwardly for a second, as my eyes moved between him and the truck, before I noticed a small detail. The handle on the inside of the door that he was holding open was missing. It wouldn't take a genius to assume what this was. I started backing away from him and hurried into my car. He yelled at me to come back, but I pulled out right away. The guy rushed into his truck, and instead of following me, he drove off in the other direction. There's absolutely no doubt that if I'd crawled into his back seat, he would have slammed the door behind me with no handle on the inside. It was obvious. Unfortunately, all I had was his email to send to the police, but there was no tracing it. I just hope nobody else falls for his disturbing Craigslist scam. I've checked a few times since then to see if his ad was back up for the PC, hoping to set him up with the police or something. So far, I haven't seen anything, but he could just be using a different alias. In trying to scam with a different item, my advice is to stay away from Craigslist. I was using Craigslist to find a condo or room in a house to live in for a few months. Most normal apartments only have 1-year leasing terms, but Craigslist was full of private owners renting out their places or rooms. Usually they were cheaper, and the owners were more willing to negotiate on the length of the lease. I had about a month to search, and I found and viewed a few places, but they all backed out last minute. Then I found another one, looking about the same as all the others. It was a room for rent in a home 20 minutes from me. The person listing it was a 22-year-old young guy. After reaching out, we texted back and forth for a few days before booking a time for me to view the room. When I drove out there and got to the street his address was on, I definitely felt a little less excited. The houses looked like they were barely standing or just not taken care of at all. Lots of yards were overgrown and even had junk in their front lawns. I guess this is what you get when you can't afford anything better, though. I hoped maybe the one I was viewing would be a little more taken care of, but when I parked in the driveway of the home, it looked like all the rest. I still figured I'd give it a shot while I was here. So I got out and pressed the doorbell. It didn't work, so I knocked. Immediately, heavy footsteps came up to the other side of the door. There was a really uncomfortable pause, like maybe a whole 15 seconds. Then he opened it, just a crack. I could only see half of his face. He asked me my name and nervously smiled and answered. Then he opened it all the way and welcomed me inside. He was tall and somewhat thin with shoulder-length hair and some tattoos showing on his neck. But it was obvious that he was not in his 20s. He was at least mid-30s, maybe even older. I was already standing inside the house at this point, though, and he was leading me through the hallway. The man was actually moving really fast, like he was trying to show me everything in a hurry and talking non-stop, which made it hard for me to think too long about anything or realize how odd the situation was. The kitchen was very old and beat up. Some of the cabinets were partially open and loosely hanging on their hinges. He only spent a few seconds in there before moving into the next hallway that had 2 doors in it. He went up to the first and turned to face me. "This one will be your room," he said, opening the door and gesturing to me to have a look. Wow. This was when I finally had a moment to catch my breath. And think about this. I figured it was probably best just to continue through with the tour, since I was already in the home, and then, obviously, never come back. But as I stood there, having only hesitated for maybe 3 or 4 seconds though, the man suddenly got angry. Like, his face and whole demeanor instantly changed. He didn't say another word but started walking toward me. I quickly backed away, to which he matched my pace and started moving quicker in my direction. I turned and sprinted down the hallway. As I left the house, I heard him stop at the front door and slam it shut behind me. I felt so stupid for having even entered the home after already realizing that things were not adding up. I know technically nothing happened, but everything was pointing to an awful outcome. After that, I was too terrified to even try Craigslist again. I live on the East Coast. There's a lot of homesteads around here, or just in general off-grid cabins and houses. Some of them aren't fully off-grid, but they're just far out and on large properties with 40-plus acres of land. It's normal around here to buy used tools and equipment from neighbors or others in the area. At the time, I was doing construction on my property and was in need of a flatbed trailer for my truck, so I could haul more materials from the hardware stores. These are absurdly expensive, but since almost everyone around here has them, there's a lot of used ones people want to get rid of. Craigslist was the first and only site that I checked on. There were actually a bunch for sale, and I sent out multiple emails. Only one of them replied, though, and we scheduled a good time for me to stop by. All I really knew going into it was that his name was Devin and that he had what I needed. Again, this was a super common thing around here that I'd done a million times before, so I had no worries going into it. I drove about an hour from my place through mostly national forest roads until I made it to his driveway. It was like most around here, just a thin gravel road into the woods. I drove through and up to his house. It was a very small and really old-looking wooden cabin with a clearing in the trees leading up to it. The thing that I first noticed, though, was that there was no flatbed trailer on the property. I mean, it's a huge thing. It couldn't just be hiding behind a tree or something, so I expected to see it right when I pulled in. The only thing I could think of was that there must be a garage or shed in the back that he kept it in. Anyway, I parked in the grass and got out. I stood there for a few seconds to see if he'd come out and meet me, but he didn't. So I walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. While waiting, I couldn't tell if any of the lights were on inside. The curtains were covering the windows and the sun was still setting, so it was too hard to tell. After waiting for a whole minute, though, nobody had come to the door, and I started to feel like nobody was even home. Then I got a text. It was from Devin, saying to come around to the back of the cabin where he had the trailer at. I felt something off about it, but also I did assume that it might be kept in the backyard, so I walked around to at least have a look. When I looked around the corner, all I saw were trees. I walked a bit further, stopping on the side of the cabin just before reaching the back. There wasn't even a clearing behind the cabin, it was just woods. Going as far as I could see, I'd had enough at this point. I started walking back to my truck, but suddenly heard something behind me. I turned and looked at the woods again, not seeing anything. What I heard sounded like someone approaching from just around the corner. I continued walking, quickening my pace, before hearing loud footsteps pushing through the grass behind me. I only caught a small view of the guy charging at me before I booked it for my truck. I don't know if he gave up right away or had something else in mind or what, but when I got in and looked back at the cabin, the guy was gone. I got out of there and drove to the nearest town, where I got in contact with the police. The short of it is that the state didn't even know about any cabin built on that land, as it was supposed to be an unoccupied parcel. When they investigated, it was clearly abandoned, with there obviously being no intent to sell me anything. The guy was definitely setting me up for some kind of harmful intent. My guess is that he was hiding along the back wall of the cabin, waiting to jump me as soon as I came around. Luckily, I knew something was up and didn't walk all the way back there. If I had, who knows where I'd be right now.